I started to work on this little circuit and I had deja vu all over again, to quote a famous footballer. This is an inverter, and you put in 12 volts on one side and 110 and 220 volts comes out of the other. And why would that cause deja vu? That's because when I was about 12 years old, I had an old tube radio. I took it out of the box and set the chassis on the work surface, plugged it in. My legs started shaking, and yeah, I was electrocuting myself. The only thing that saved me is I didn't have my hands in contact with the work surface. So it is not clickbait to say that this video could save lives. The unappreciated nature of the work surface is something we don't often talk about. Some are good for one thing, some are good for another. There are very few that are just good all the way around. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the different work surfaces that we have on our workbenches and the pros and cons of each one of those. When I'm working with my scope and low voltage electronics, even things that are higher amperage, I will often work on this surface. This is one of those like kitchen laminates, a plastic laminate. It's really good for that, doesn't carry electricity. And yeah, so things like amperage, voltage are not an issue. It is a little bit more stain resistant, so if you're working with chemicals, it's not a bad surface. On the downside, yeah, you won't ever see me soldering on this because you drip solder on it, it peels up, it burns it, whatever. This is the type you cannot sand out. If you can find an old piece of that kitchen countertop where you could sand out stains, that would be ideal for something like this. They're still not as heat resistant, but they're pretty good. So those are plastic laminates. When I'm soldering and such, you'll see that over the laminate, I put this metal sheet. And metal has some really good properties. You can see it's heat resistant where I've dropped solder on it or accidentally left the soldering iron in contact with it for a while. It's, you know, pretty much chemical resistant. I've spilled stuff down here. It doesn't burn. Yeah, so it's good for things like soldering and such. But where it's not good, and what it almost got me when I was a kid, was for voltage. Yeah, it'll carry voltage. The best thing that can happen is you end up with a short somewhere, and the worst thing that happen is you're the short and it electrocutes you or you're seriously injured. So yeah, metal, good for heat, soldering type applications, not so good for electricity. Another thing you see on many of my favorite YouTube channels is a woodworking surface, and wood has a lot of good properties to it. You can pound on it lightly and it's not too bad for that. It is good for lower voltages. I would not use it for higher voltages because it contains carbon and water, and those two things will carry higher voltages and it can get you. So yeah, not good for that. It's okay for soldering. As long as you don't apply a lot of heat to it, a solder drip usually won't hurt it badly. It'll stain from flux and things like that, but yeah, okay. But the downside is obviously burns. If you apply a lot of heat to it over a period of time, you will get a burn. You'll start to get divots in it and it will stain. It's not chemical proof and you'll have to sand it out occasionally. But overall, it's not a bad work surface for most applications. There are some other surfaces like tile or ceramic, and they have some interesting properties for work surfaces. One of the best I have ever seen, the chemistry department in the high school near our house when I was a kid was changing out they're just remodeling and taking everything out, selling it, buying all new stuff. And my dad bought some of the workbenches, and these things had, like 2-inch thick. It was some kind of a stone. It may have been an artificial stone, but that was the greatest stuff ever. I mean, it was electrical proof, chemical proof, heat proof, everything proof. The only drawback is it was so heavy that a 5-foot long piece took 2 people to lift. So that was a disadvantage, but otherwise it was really excellent. So let's talk about these type of things like stone or tile or anything similar like that. First of all, it won't burn easily. Enough heat will crack it, but yeah, they don't burn. They don't really stain very badly. They're definitely chemical proof. They are heat resistant. Again, too much heat, they will crack. And let's see, what else is good for them? So soldering, chemicals, any type of work like that, not too bad. If you're into jewelry, stuff like that, it's not a bad surface at all. The drawback is, well, some of these surfaces are kind of pricey. And I mean, if you're going to lay down a tile surface and do it right, rather than just put in a piece of tile like I do on occasion, if you're going to make a tile top workbench, well, yeah, the cost is pretty significant. If you're going to go for the laboratory grade surfaces, oh, they're outrageously expensive and they're kind of hard to find. And yeah, it's mostly a commercial sale. They do chip. They will chip if you hit them hard enough. Even that stuff my father had would chip. And yeah, so it's not impact resistant. They are not fully heat resistant, at least some of them. The laboratory grade, yes, but a piece of tile like this, no. Again, if you heat it hot enough, it will crack or chip, blow out parts of the surface. Well, that's it for our discussion of the different types of work surfaces for your home projects. I hope you found that useful and interesting. Remember to always work safe.